Okay, well, so let me get organized again here. Okay, so far we have been focusing on, well, we've been extending what we discussed on the first day, which are the three core qualities of great sentences: economy, specificity, and musicality. And musicality being the one that is the most complex and the one that we've spent the most time talking about, and we will again really talk about today. Just sort of as a review, in the first lesson, we talked about rhythm as a fundamental basis for musicality. And in the second session, we talked about suspensive sentences and what Marianne just mentioned, the left branching and right branching and cumulative syntax, which can allow us to give our sentences a richer specificity and a musically satisfying complexity of pattern. Today we're going to continue to talk about musicality, hopefully continuing and kind of expanding on that discussion, both in terms of sentences on their own, and also in today, especially toward the end, in terms of in their context, in the context of paragraphs and passages. So not just on their own. But the other big theme that keeps coming up in our discussions is this theme of pattern and variation. And, you know, pattern and variation sort of being the foundation of the mesmerizing nature of musical sentences. You know, we talked about why humans are fascinated by waves breaking on a shore, or by watching a campfire, or by watching the snowfall. And that is because pattern provides a framework, a structure upon which our minds can rest, allowing us to focus on, you know, on the meaning of what we're reading, or on the, so it sort of allows our minds to rest, while at the same time we have this variation, which provides interest, just engaged in finding out how the next variation is going to take shape. So it's sort of, you know, so musicality is also suspensive in a way, because we're sort of like, okay, wait, what variation is going to be next? If you listen to that Bach fugue that we talked about, it's always like, okay, it's the same pattern again and again, but it's always a little different. What's it going to be next time? I mean, subconsciously. So but musicality itself is also propulsive, which is interesting. But the main thing is that this combination of pattern and variation is intrinsically mesmerizing to the human mind, which is something that we as writers would do well to keep in mind. And so on the sentence level, there are a number of patterns that we can vary to create the same kinds of mesmerizing effects that we've identified in music. You know, we've already discussed many of them: repetition for rhythmic emphasis, parallelism, anaphora, epistrophe, and simplicity. If you remember, you may have to refer back to your handouts to know what those are. Serial constructions, you know, the rule of three, the rhythm of two for balance and harmony, the rule of three for a sense of completeness, and how lists sometimes that are made up of more than three imply a sense of bigness, or sort of overflowing plenitude or abundance. And when we were looking at cumulative syntax, we were looking at those diagrams, and we were able to really, I think, see the hidden patterns and variations that are responsible for creating the irresistible music of some of these longer sentences. So that just gets us up to date now. And I want to continue now talking about rhythm, but it's almost like backing up a little bit too, because, you know, we sort of talked about how rhythm can be like a ground bass or a drum beat. And this is where meter comes in. So today I really want to start looking at, you know, sort of small sound effects in sentences. And one of the most important ones is meter, which is like the drum beat or the ground bass of a sentence. So a basic aspect of musicality. So for example, I'm going to read you these examples from John Gardner that on your handout. Lisa, did you get the handout?
I did, thank you, sir.
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, good. So, and I'll read them to you twice, just so you can. I'll read them to you normally, and then I'll read them with the meter, the beats, you know, the emphasis sort of marked in bold. So, rhythm and variation are as basic to prose as to poetry. All prose must force rhythms, just like verse. Okay, so I'm going to read them slowly with the meter, sort of noting the meter. Rhythm and variation are as basic to prose as to poetry. Do you see that? Those are the words, those are the syllables that we tend to emphasize, and that's providing meter in a sentence. This is something that poets are really, you know, quite aware of. and prose writers should be more aware of, because it really is something that we can use. And then the second one, all prose must force rhythms just like verse. Do you see that? How it's all of those syllables are sort of emphasized in a very different way. So it's providing a different kind of drumbeat. And so again, meter is yet another thing that we can use to create these intrinsically mesmerizing patterns and variations. And I think that, I mean, meter is also like cumulative syntax. It's the kind of thing that it's good to kind of look at and see how it's working, but you really don't need to be thinking about this when you're actually writing. It's just being aware of it will help you somehow, use it and identify it when you're reading. And if you're aware of it, I think you'll just become better at using it. So let's look at a few more examples of metrical sentences to get a better feel for this. Will someone read us this next one from Larry Brown's Joe? Just read it twice, once without the meter emphasized and once with the meter emphasized. Yes, Lee, thank you. You're muted.
Oh, you're
Lee.
muted, Lee.
Sorry.
There were 5 of them standing beside the road with their hands in their pockets and the orange tips of their cigarettes winking in their lips. Larry Brown, Joe. There were 5 of them standing beside the road with their hands in their pockets and the orange tips of their cigarettes winking in their lips.
Thank you. So this sentence has a pretty regular meter, right? It's sort of, and this regular meter is kind of a subconscious pattern or rhythm that allows, or a beat that allows the mind to rest. It's, it's one of the reasons that Shakespeare used iambic pentameter, which is even more regular than the sentence that we just read. I mean, every Shakespeare sentence, not everyone, but most of the Shakespeare sentences in his plays are in iambic pentameter. And that's one of the reasons that you can read this complex prose and it makes sense to you, because you have this kind of meter drumbeat underlying it that's allowing part of your mind to rest while you focus on the imagery. That's true in Shakespeare, and I think that's also true here in Larry Brown. So again, not that you should necessarily be writing your sentences with a self-conscious eye toward meter, but just noticing it again will help you take advantage of the natural rhythms of sentences. Okay, so let's look at a very different one. This is from Carmen Maria Machado, Her Body and Other Parties. Will someone read it? This, yes, David.
Before
Yeah.
I do,
Yeah.
are you suggesting that just the way it was read by Lee, that we emphasize the words in bold? Did I miss that part? Is that the?
I'm suggesting that that's sort of the natural rhythm. I'm just basically identifying something that's already there. So the way that Lee read it the first time, if we had really slowed down and listened to the way that she was emphasizing the syllables, that's just the way someone reading English language, it just naturally tends to subconsciously emphasize. But marking it in bold just kind of makes it really clear for us, which ones that sort of naturally have emphasis.
Sure. Okay, so here she is on the porch, all straw hair and slumpy joints, and a crack that passes through her lips like she is dirt that has never known rain. Carmen Maria Machado, Her Body and Other Parties. Here she is on the porch, all straw hair and slumpy joints, and a crack that passes through her lips like she is dirt that has never known the rain. Sorry for adding in a little.
No, that's good. Thank you. So just the one thing to notice here is if you see how the meter alternates here, it sort of it creates these patterns that kind of shift throughout the sentence. It's got here she is on the porch. That's more of sort of like, and it's not really iambic pentameter, but it's more sort of like, the rhythmical emphasis like we read in the last sentence. And then we have all straw hair and slumpy joints. And then again, at the very end of the sentence, we have never known rain. So I think in poetry, I don't know, any poets here, I think you might call that enjambment when you have those 3 emphasized syllables right in a row. But the main thing is not to know the jargon, it's just to sort of notice what that sentence is doing. That it's sort of alternating these rhythms, and the patterns are shifting through the sentence, and it's fun to read because it gives us, a compressed example of metrical pattern and variation. So again, don't set out to do this when you're creating a sentence unless you really want to, but noticing it in revision and sort of, and another reason why reading your sentences aloud, in late revision can be really, really helpful, because you're seeing them, even if you're not, it doesn't really matter what your meter is, but if you're seeing them as, at least at a certain point in the drafting process, if you're seeing them as little mini musical compositions, then you're making great strides already toward making your sentences more musical, just seeing them that way without even trying to do anything particular. Does that make sense? I mean, it's sort of like knowing this stuff is good, but it's not necessary to know. It's just noticing it that helps you.
Yeah, one of the things that I often notice is that a strong sentence or a sentence at the end of a passage will end on a single downbeat, which you can certainly see in both of those. Especially never known rain, repeated downbeats with one syllable words will sort of add some punch to the end of a sentence.
Yeah, it's almost like a cymbal clash. It's like, it's cool. Yeah. Okay, so that's meter. Don't need to spend much more time on it. But now we're sort of still talking about sentence level sound effects, and I want to talk about assonance and consonants. And these are just terms for repeating either similar vowel sounds like clean and neat, or consonants like in Dr. Seuss, The Island of Salamason. Dr. Seuss uses a lot of consonants that are neighboring or grammatically corresponding words. So an example, will someone read us this example from Annie Dillard, Living Like Weasels? This is an example of assonance. Yeah, Lisa.
His journal is tracks in clay, a spray of feathers, mouse blood and bone, uncollected, unconnected, loose leaf, and blown.
Okay, great. And now, do you see how these similar vowel sounds sort of play off each other? Loosely, or mouse blood and bone, uncollected, unconnected, loose leaf and blown, tracks in clay. Sort of like they're playing off each other. It's like a little poem, this sentence. And, Annie Dillard is known for her beautiful sentences, and I think she was pretty conscious about doing it this way. Okay, let's look at an example that is musically enlivened by both assonance and consonants. This is from Amy Lowell's Bath. Will someone read us this one, please? Yes, Mary Ann.
Sure. The day is fresh washed and fair, and there is a smell of tulips and narcissus in the air. The sunshine pours in at the bathroom window and bores through the water in the bathtub in lathes and planes of greenish white. It cleaves the water into flaws like a jewel and cracks it to bright light.
Right, thank you. So do you hear the way that she's sort of reveling in these vowel sounds, these sort of rhyming or similar vowel sounds kind of, echoing each other throughout the sentence. And then also the consonants too, the soft S and SH sounds and the hard C's and K's and T's toward the end, and how all these sounds are sort of working together to create an effect. And so I should ask you, what is the effect of that sentence? How does that sentence make you feel when you read it? When Mary Ann read it to us, how did it make you feel?
Like taking a bath, for sure.
Yeah, like, wow.
Not a shower, a bath.
Yeah.
Relaxed.
Yeah. It makes it sound pretty appealing. It's sort of like a symphony, of sounds. Great. So yes, this stuff can be effective. And this is an example of a passage that's really dominated by consonants. Harriet Mullen's Kill Bugs Dead. Well, this is kind of a fun one too. And as we read this, sort of pay attention to how it's kind of how these sounds are making you feel and why. Who will give us this one? Lee? Okay.
Redundancy is syntactical overkill, a pinprick of peace at the end of the tunnel of a nightmare night in a roach motel. Their noise infects the dream. In black kitchens, they foul the food, walk on our bodies as we sleep over oceans of pirate flags, skull and crossbones. They crunch like candy, When they die, they will eat us unless we kill them first. Invest in better mousetraps. Harriet Mullen. Kill bugs dead.
So, I mean, how does that sentence make you feel?
Creepy.
Pretty creepy, isn't it? It's creepy because of the subject matter, but I think it's also creepy because of the sounds that she's using.
Yeah, they're jarring.
Yeah, they're sort of like crunching and, you know.
Pinprick.
Yeah. So these are definitely options, right? These are things you can do. So other sound effects, you know, we've all heard. Yes, so go ahead, someone. Did someone have a comment? No? Okay.
Well, especially the crunch like candy. That's what really got me.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, those cockroaches. Okay, so you know, sound effects. We've all heard, you know, these things: alliteration, onomatopoeia, and more. Alliteration is a kind of consonance that refers to the repetition of the initial sounds of words in a phrase or sentence. Hooray for different do for day is an example that people use. Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss uses these sound effects all the time.
Mhm.
Onomatopoeia is when we name a thing or action by imitating the sounds associated with this. We all know this, right? We've all heard of onomatopoeia and alliteration. And again, it's not so much knowing them as just at a certain point in the writing process, understanding that you can use this to create musicality. And again, so it's more just recognizing that there are sound effects available for you to use, because I think a lot of us, like when I'm writing the draft of something, this is the last thing I'm thinking of. I'm thinking about plot, character, trying to say something that makes sense, you know, being logical, whatever it is. But at a certain point, stopping to think about things like this can make a huge difference in terms of the voice of your writing. So I wanted to just look at a few more examples of the way that sound effects can be used in sentences. And this is maybe more subtle than the ones we've looked at. The first one is from Tolkien's Hobbit. I'll just read this one. One morning they forded a river at a wide, shallow place full of the noise of stones and foam. Can you hear that river? You know, noise of stones and foam. I can just hear the river as I'm sort of walking across it. And then will someone read us this one from this longer one from Virginia Woolf? You know, this is more of a coastal scene. Lisa.
The monotonous fall of the waves on the beach, which for the most part beat a measured and soothing tattoo to her thoughts and seemed consolingly to repeat over and over again as she sat with the children, the words of some old cradle song murmured by nature, I am guarding you, I am your support. But at other times, suddenly and unexpectedly, especially when her mind raised itself slightly from the task actually in hand, had no such kindly meaning, but like a ghostly roll of drums, remorselessly beat the measure of life, made one think of the destruction of the island and its engulfment in the sea, and warned her whose day had slipped past in one quick doing after another, that it was all ephemeral as a rainbow. This sound, which had been obscured and concealed under the other sounds, suddenly thundered hollow in her ears and made her look up with an impulse of terror.
Ooh, such a great, especially that end and the impulse of terror. We talked about saving the important meaning for the end. But so what do we think about the sounds of that sentence? How does it make you feel? What vision do you have in your mind when you heard Lisa read it?
It feels and sounds very wave-like to me.
Yeah.
It's certainly mesmerizing feeling.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, like waves crashing on the beach, the sort of monotonous, soothing tattoo, murmured, all of the L-Y words, and the ghostly roll, the remorselessly beat and thundered hollow. All of those are different sounds that might be, you know, that might contribute to that mesmerizing effect of, you know, this pattern of waves showing up on shore, that they're always a little different. And there are lots of different sounds. You can, you know, we talk about like the boom the boom of waves at the shore, something like that. But she really, like, she's giving us the sounds, you know, in lots of different ways, which is pretty cool.
I also noticed, you know, it's almost like a lullaby or putting me to sleep.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden at the end, all of boom,
Mm.
boom, wake the impulse of terror. And I want to look back and see, what did I miss?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, it sort of lulls you into a sense of peace and calm, and then all of a sudden, uh-oh, there's terror here too. Okay, let's look at another one. This is from Toni Morrison. We've actually seen this sentence before, but let's listen to it now in terms of the sound effects that we've been discussing. Will someone read us this one from Toni? Lee, thanks.
Clarinets had trouble because the brass was cut so fine, not low down the way they love to do it, but high and fine, like a young girl singing by the side of a creek, passing time, her ankles cold in the water.
Yeah,
Mm.
thanks. So you notice the way that that sounds. This is a story about jazz. You notice how it sort of sounds like jazz. It's got that varied rhythm, and it's got this you know, the sounds, that sort of sound effects that kind of echo and rhyme with each other. It's really beautiful. All right, so there's one passage I want to read you. I'll read you this one. This is from Madeline Miller's Circe, which is a book that I really loved when I read it a couple of years ago, and that I think she's doing some amazing things with sound in this one. And this is basically her character Circe is on a boat, and they're just about to go through the straits of Scylla and Charybdis, the famous mountain, you know, this monster that you get caught between the monster on the shore and the whirlpool. Scylla and Charybdis is, you know, a mythological trap. Okay, so let me read this. The mist came first. It closed in, wet and heavy, obscuring the cliffs, then the sky itself. We could see little, and the sound of the sucking whirlpool filled our ears. That whirlpool was, of course, the reason Scylla had chosen these straits. To avoid its pull, ships must steer close to the opposite cliff. It brought them right beneath her teeth. We pushed on through the thick air. As we entered the straits, the sound grew hollowed, echoing off the stone walls. My skin, the deck, the rail, every surface was thick with spray. The water foamed and an oar scraped the rock face. A small sound, but the men flinched as if it were a thunderclap. Above us, buried in the fog, was the cave and Scylla. I know. I mean, I love that passage. When I read that passage, I was like, holy crap. I mean, why am I so scared right now? I am so it's, you know, partly it's great because, you know, the imagery is so sharp and concrete. You know, it does what we talked about that good sentences do. It gives us a lot of specificity. You know, so, and when we're faced with this kind of specificity of detail, as we discussed, you know, the first time, you know, our imaginations go about constructing this vividly unfolding scene in our mind. So that's part of it, is the specificity, but part of it is the way are the sound effects. You know, if you were to mark the meter as you read those sentences, you know, you would notice that there's a real pattern. You would notice a lot of assonance and dissonance, the way that the vowels and consonants sort of knock and creak and slip against each other. And for me, at least, I don't know exactly how she did it, but it's a sort of a soundtrack, and the soundtrack is the same kind of soundtrack that you would get from like a horror movie. To avoid its pull, ships must steer close to the opposite cliff. It brought them right beneath her teeth. The water foamed and an oar scraped the rock face. A small sound, but the men flinched as if it were a thunderclap. So we have, you know, in addition to these sensory, you know, these really specific sensory images that are being projected into our, you know, onto our little screening panel inside our mind, we're like, wow, we can really see the sound because of the specificity. We also have this soundtrack, you know, with the result that we are transported right into this scene, to this ship full of helpless sailors. And Scylla, when she does come out, is going to scare the living crap out of us. And that's really good because, you know, oftentimes in fiction, you sort of strive to create, if you want to create a scene that has a specific emotion, it's hard, and especially one of fear, so she's, Madeline Miller is using all the tools at her disposal to make sure that we're sort of psychologically prepped for the fact that this is going to be a really scary scene. And
I wonder, having read both of Madeline Miller's books, this Achilles as well, pretty much all of her writing is like this through both books, and maybe not as intensely so in Achilles. That's a little bit more interiority going on in that one. But I wonder, if we deconstruct, how did she come up with this? I would imagine she did her research over the course of what, years of studying this. Then she wrote her version of the stories, and then she applied this as the soundtrack that you're talking about. I mean, I can't imagine, as you said, when you first start thinking about constructing your story, you don't have these beautiful sentences worked out yet. But I can't. It sounds somewhat. It's as with several of these examples, it's genius, at least from my perspective. So.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that is probably true. I mean, she is a scholar of Greek mythology, so she's done tons of research. She's also just a really good novelist, and I think my suspicion is she's probably just paid a lot of attention to language. She's probably read a lot of poetry and thought a lot about things like meter and assonance and dissonance. And so that in some sense, it probably comes naturally to her in first draft, but then in later drafts, I think she probably really, I would imagine, because her writing is so beautiful, she probably does a draft toward the end where she's just like, I'm just going to go through this sentence by sentence and try and make them, sing as much as I can, especially when they need to, like in a situation like this. That would be my guess. But I'm glad you appreciate it, David. I do too. I think she's really good. So again, the point is just to recognize the sound effects of sentences that are available to you. If you read beautiful sentences, you will eventually write beautiful sentences. I mean, I have there's this metaphor about, everything you read is sort of like vegetation that's trampled down in the Triassic era. And when it emerges in your own writing, it's not recognizable as the same beautiful prose you read. It comes out as something different, but it's like oil that comes up out of the ground, bubbling out of the ground from everything that you've read, which is a really good argument for reading good stuff. And it's also an argument, I think, for fiction writers to read poetry, to read poetry and just sort of, it doesn't have to be much. Ray Bradbury used to talk about how he would read every night before he went to bed. He would read one short story, one poem, and one essay. And I was like, oh, great. I don't do that exactly, but I do try to read, both poetry and nonfiction as well as fiction. I think that all of that stuff can't help but make you a better writer, especially if you notice it. You're like, oh, look at what they're doing there, So, okay, so are you guys ready for a quick writing exercise? Okay, so the exercise is to describe a character or a scene in a brief passage using mostly long vowels and soft consonants, such as O as in moan, E as in see, L, M, S, all soft, long vowels and soft consonants. Then take a moment and then write the same passage or about the same character or scene using mostly short vowels and hard consonants. I as in sit, as in cut, a as in clack, K, teep, G, hard, you know what I mean? So let's just take 5 minutes to do that. Just a short passage in soft and long, and then the same subject matter in short and hard. Okay. So it's 1:33. Let's just take 5 minutes and I'll call you back around 1:38. Okay, so what did you think? Was there a difference?
I couldn't really do it, actually.
Oh,
I
really?
came up with the paragraph. I'm gonna have to try this one again. I found it really hard.
It
Really?
is hard.
I
Yeah.
I
found it
just
hard
started
too.
writing
Yeah.
and it took a lot on a life of its own. And then by the time it was over, I was like,
Well, that's
uh,
good. And it takes on
not
less.
sure what I did.
No, I mean, it is kind of weird for people who write a lot to ask yourself to do something like this that is so, heavily self-editing. It's kind of like, wait, I'm not supposed to, that's actually in itself maybe a good lesson. But any other observations from this?
Yeah, it was just wildly hard, especially the second one. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to do it again.
Okay, good. Well, that's homework then. That's a
Tim, were you suggesting that we rewrite the same sentence or something similar
no,
to?
something similar. Like, just because what I was trying to get at here is like, so if you think about, I go back to Tolkien, right? Tolkien, when he writes about, for example, the orcs, he does, like in their names and in the way they talk, he uses a lot of hard consonants and short vowels. Uruk ha, whatever, so and it's sort of a way of capturing something about what, about orcs. It's a way, how can you harness these sounds to create emotions? Or some of the passages that we've looked at, and I wouldn't want to like draw any kind of hard and fast line between like soft consonants and long vowels, meaning something, but just being aware that there can be effects and that you can use this if you have a scene where where you want to create a sense of lulling your reader, then maybe try using some of this. Or if you have a scene where you want to convey a sense of coarseness, or well, the bug sentence is a good example, right? That thing about bugs, that's what she did. And that basically we were sort of reprising what the writer of the bath passage and the writer of the bug passage did in a way. So it's just something, yeah.
If I could try this, so I just took best I could do is come up with some phrases and to see if I'm doing it, if you think I'm doing it. Una laughed as she lays on an inflated, I've got some consonant, mattress on the wavy river. And then the second example is Ricky walked to the edge of the cliff edge and gawked at the girl headed to the brink of the rapids.
Yeah, I think you really, that's perfect. And it does capture something maybe about the way that each of these characters moves, or the mindset, or the emotional state that they're in, maybe.
Right. So in my search for perfection, as I typically get slowed down by it, so is it wrong to put the word mattress in there with the hard consonants in the first example? No. It's just dominated by softer sounds is what the point is, right?
Yeah, and even in the context of this exercise, that wouldn't be wrong, but it's certainly not wrong in the context of trying to write. Yeah, it doesn't have to be pure, soft, and low to create that.
Right. Okay.
Well, anyway, again, I mean, this is definitely more an art than a science, which is kind of good. But so there's nothing definitive that we can take out of this, but just being aware that it is something that you can play with, I think is the whole point. So I want to turn to focus on a concept that's at the heart of sentence level musicality, and it's something that we've referred to a few times already, and that is sentences that sing the meaning of themselves. By the way, you can also call this concept syntactic symbolism, or you could also call it rhythmic mimesis. Sentences that are arranged to look or sound like the image or action or image or emotion that they describe. But it doesn't really matter whether we call it syntactic symbolism or rhythmic mimesis or sentences that sing the message of themselves. What we're doing is we're going to a discussion of musicality that goes beyond rhythm and meter and assonance and dissonance and other consonants, and other sound effects. We're still using these sound effects as, for example, Madeline Miller was in that passage. But what we're really talking about is we're talking about sentences that echo or embody their own underlying meaning. And again, just so you know, a little warning, this is also more art than science. So we're probably not going to derive any specific principles here, but I think it's more just a question of noticing the way that sentences can seeing the meaning of themselves that can be very helpful for us. Will someone read us this first one from Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? Yeah, Marianne.
I stepped on the merry-go-round and hurried around the bar, approaching my attorney on the blind side. And when we came to the right spot, I pushed him off.
Right. Okay. So how does this sentence sing the meaning of itself?
Well, certainly the merry-go-round, I forget what that beat is what that beat is called, but I think those repeated, downbeat and then up, up, down, up, up, give you that kind of rapid motion.
Yeah. Sort of like a cyclical kind of motion, like a calliope type thing.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Right. And
right.
what about the end of the sentence? Did anybody notice anything there? We've talked about a little about M dash. What does that M dash do?
I think it makes it choppier.
Yeah. But what's that sentence? What's that part of the sentence about?
And it's about pushing somebody.
It's about, when we came to the right spot, pushing them off. And
yeah.
In fact, that's kind of what that M dash is doing. It's pushing us off the end of the sentence.
Okay. Yeah.
The sentence that, I think you're right. It's sort of like calliope, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then push. M dash, in a way. I mean, again, it's more of an art than a science, but it's sort of like a dizzy circling followed by the sudden action communicated with the M dash that kind of takes us by surprise. I pushed him off, it's sort of seeing that thing, that surprise for the end of the sentence after the M dash, boom. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay. Will someone read us this next one? This is from Philip Pullman's The Golden Compass. Yeah, David.
The sun was shining brightly and the green waves were dashing against the bows, bearing white streams of foam as they curved away. Philip Pullman.
Great. So what can we say about this one? How does this sentence sing the meaning of itself? It's subtle.
The rhythm of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The green waves were dashing against the bows. Yeah. And then what about that last part of the sentence again? It's bearing white streams of foam as they curved away. And so as the sentence ends, we're sort of watching it recede. We're watching the sentence recede. I mean, this is pretty subtle, but so the initial clause sets the background. The sun was shining brightly. The next clause introduces a clear and active image, and the green waves were dashing against the bows, which does sort of feel like a ship cutting through the bows with that rhythm there, right? Cutting through the waves. And then the third clause sort of enacts or embodies the wake of the boat subsiding behind it, bearing white streams of foam as they curved away. Curved away sort of is a flourish ending for both the sentence and the image. It's sort of like curved away. We're watching it recede into the background. See that? Again, this is not scientific. It's really, a lot of it is just our interpretation of it, but it is a sentence that, it very plausibly kind of embodies what it's describing. Okay, here's another one. This is from Ursula K. Le Guin. Will someone read us this one? It's another oceanic one. Lee, great.
One after another, the ships breasted the waves at the bar, rising and plunging. One after another, they came straight on.
Okay, so now do we see that one? That's pretty straightforward, right? It's like these boats coming in, the rhythm, the meter, the repeated phrase, one after another. So it's a repetition. It's like one boat comes and then another comes. It's like that is sort of showing us the boats, right? And this is an aphora, right? That's enacting or embodies the motion of the ships coming in, rising and plunging on the waves. And then as if freed after that final comma, one after another, they came straight on. And came straight on is a, it's like 3 quick syllables that basically show us, do the words do what the ships are doing. They come straight on. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one. This is from Francis Spufford's Golden Hill. I'll read this one. When they shambled out at last onto the snow crust of William Street, in a moonless night, a single degree of blue removed from black, the shock of the cold hit the freshly steamed and softened flesh of their bare faces like a slammed door. To me, it's the slam door of that sentence that does it. That sentence basically has a door that slams at the end. It's a big sentence, right? And so it really makes it a sentence that the slamming door, to me, really makes it a sentence that sings the meaning of itself. Okay, this next one from Larry Brown's Joe. Anyone? Oh yeah, Lisa.
There was a knock at the door the next morning, and it took him a moment to realize and remember what he had seen. The milky blue, opaque eyes, dead and lifeless and unblinking, and the woman undeniably dead too, so still, so quiet.
Yeah, right. Again, it's the way that the sentence ends to me, the way it sort of seems to stutter and then ends in stillness and silence. So it sort of enacts the death that's in the sentence in the way that the sentence sort of dies. Okay, and then again, this next one from James Baldwin is so subtle that it may be just my imagination, but I like it. So will someone read us this one from James Baldwin? Yeah, David.
Yeah, when he smiled, when we shook hands, the baby brother I'd never known looked out from the depth of his private life, like an animal waiting to be coaxed into the light.
Right. So for me, I mean, the reason that I feel like this is a sentence that sings the meaning of itself is that the suspensive ending, it's a suspensive sentence, right? The baby brother I'd never known. And then the final phrase, like an animal waiting to be coaxed out into the light, to me sort of embodies the act of discovering what's hidden, right? It's sort of this hidden boy that is like an animal waiting to be coaxed into the light. And to me, that last clause is almost like that is the hidden thing that we're coaxing out into the light at the end of the sentence. I mean, that may be stretching it, but I think it's, it's a good sentence. And for me, it does kind of sing the meaning of itself. And this next one is really actually quite, this is a kind of a distinctive kind of sentence that sings the meaning of itself. It's more of what you might call an experiential sentence. It's sort of using the structure of the sentence to portray or capture movement or action in time that's being described sort of as it's happening. And Hemingway was big on that, writing some, he wanted, for many of his stories, he wanted them to take the same amount of time to read that they would take to live. And so this is a sentence, I think, where he's sort of doing that. Does anyone want to take a stab at this? Yeah, Marianne.
I'll try it. And is it Maycomber? How would you pronounce that name?
I think it's Macomber.
Macomber. Okay.
Yeah.
Wilson, who was ahead, was kneeling, shooting, and Macomber, as he fired, unhearing his shot in the roaring of Wilson's gun, saw fragments like slate burst from the huge boss of the horns, and the head jerked. He shot again at the wide nostrils and saw the horns jolt again and fragments fly. And he did not see Wilson now, and aiming carefully, shot again with the buffalo's huge bulk almost on him, and his rifle almost level with the oncoming head, nose out, and he could see the little wicked eyes, and the head started to lower, and he felt a sudden, white-hot, blinding flash explode inside his head, and that was all he ever felt. Woo.
It's quite a sentence, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
My God, that was one sentence.
That's one sentence, and that's the end of The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber short story. Yeah, good. So anyway, but just, it's an experiential sentence. It enacts or embodies the movement that it describes. And
Yeah.
of course, we have that really striking ending with the white hot blinding flash explode inside his head, and that was all he ever felt. End of sentence. End of story. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so all right, and then let's look at another one. This is a different kind of experiential sentence. This is one that enacts or embodies the movement it just describes also. But in this case, it's not a compressed moment or fraction of a second that it's describing. It's a long, extended cross-country trip. And the sentence kind of takes on the form of a trip. I'll do this one just to spare you guys, because this is, if you haven't read this story, it's sort of. Now, in perusing what follows, the reader should bear in mind not only the general circuit as adumbrated above, with its many side trips and tourist traps, secondary circles, and skittish deviations, but also the fact that far from being an indolent partie de plaisir, our tour was hard, twisted, theological growth, whose sole raison d'etre, those French cliches are symptomatic, was to keep my companion in passable humor from kiss to kiss. So do you see how the sentence itself takes you for a trip, for a tour, and also, talking about with its many side trips and tourist traps, secondary circles and skittish deviations. It's sort of taking you on these little circuits and deviations as part of the trip of the sentence. You see that?
Yeah.
All right. So, and then there's this next one from Virginia Woolf. As someone who want to read, who read Virginia Woolf before? You did such a good job. Was that you, Lisa? Will you do this one? This is another.
I love Virginia Woolf. I'll read her. Sure. What people had shed and left: a pair of shoes, a shooting cap, some faded skirts and coats in wardrobes. Those alone kept the human shape, and in the emptiness indicated how once they were filled and animated, how once hands were busy with hooks and buttons, how once the looking glass had held a face, had held a world hollowed out, in which a figure turned, a hand flashed, the door opened, in came children rushing and tumbling, and went out again.
Yeah, thank you. So again, it's the way that this is another one that's a passage of long periods of time. But just to me, what's striking about it is the way that the clothes are animated and hands that were once busy and looking glasses that held a face. It sort of feels to me like a sentence that is literally haunted. The sentence is haunted by ghosts, and the sentence sort of enacts the passage of time and shows the ghost moving through the house and going out again. I mean, to me, I feel like it's really a beautiful sort of haunted sentence. But again, this is more art than science. And someone could also say that I'm absolutely full of crap here, but I don't. So let's see, how are we doing on time? Well, why don't we just take a few minutes, just like 2 minutes, to just try to write a single sentence that sings the meaning of itself. Just a simple shot at this. I'll call you back in about 2 minutes. Oh, I see the cat. Nice to have a cat. Cats are like,
It's hard to work when she's sitting on my paper.
I know, they do tend to get in the way. All right, so did anyone get one?
I think I got one.
All right.
See what you think.
Okay.
Write a single sentence that sings the meaning of itself, he said. The meaning, the motion, the difficulty, the fingers typing on the keyboard while all the time the rhythm beats on and on and on.
Oh, I love it. That's so great. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, it's like after we've been reading these passages aloud, and they're very musical passages, and I'm really paying attention to the rhythm.
Yeah.
It's like I feel you're right. I'm going to read a poem every night.
Yeah, I mean, that is the takeaway. I mean, it's really true. That was a beautiful sentence. It did sort of partake of the rhythms that we've been listening to. Anyone else want to give us one? Yeah, Lee. We'll go Lee and then we'll go Lisa.
Okay. He ran down the steps, one foot after the other, hard and fast, in a hurry to leave the house.
I love the one foot after the other. That really does. That whole first part of the sentence really did, seem to create the sense of running down the stairs. Beautiful. Lisa.
I don't think I've finished the sentence yet, but that's kind of appropriate maybe. She searched for images to capture the disintegrating feeling of the jumbled life they were leading now. And the best she could come up with were appliance metaphors, a washing machine, a blender, a Cuisinart, or a coffee grinder.
Oh, I love it.
I love that.
Yeah, the way that it's sort of like a jungled life, and it ends with these very sort of everyday items, Very nice. All right, David, do you want to read yours, or are you good? Oh, you're muted. David, you're still muted.
Okay, so very rough. I don't even know if it makes sense. So saw Hugo. He was about to jump in the water, his ears flapping, trunk curling and uncurling, turning around and around, one foot then the other, dipping in the rushing water, lapping up and splashing him as his eyes, there would be an M dash there, his eyes twinkled as he slipped in. So
oh yeah, that totally does it. I love he's like turning around and around in the water, and then the M dash and twinkled, and he slipped. It's a beautiful one.
Yeah, so I wanted to try to capture his maybe his fear, but his excitement. He loves swimming, but at the same time he was a little bit afraid to do it. And he, as we see little children eventually get in the water, you can just tell that they're full of happiness, joy, or whatever. But I don't know if that came across.
Yeah.
It was very musical. It
Definitely.
was really very wonderfully musical.
Very good. Wow, this is really good. And just in 2 minutes, it's amazing what you guys came up with. So just imagine now how much you could come up with in a single day of writing. So I want to spend the rest of the time today talking about a very important topic when it comes to the musicality of sentences that we haven't discussed, and that's context. Because sentences usually don't stand on their own. I mean, they're usually part of something larger, namely paragraphs. So let's look at some ways to create musicality, not so much in single sentence necessarily, but in the way that you put them together. So remember the exercise that we did at the beginning of the second lesson about writing long and short sentences. Do you ask yourself as a writer, do you tend to write mostly in short or long sentences? Or maybe you vary it. Or maybe if you look at if you sort of scan some pages of your work, you'll find a lot of sentences the same length. That certainly has been the case for me. And this is not varying sentence length is not something that is new to anybody. I mean, this is something that we've all heard before. But I think that in order to understand it on a more visceral level, we should read this great next paragraph from Gary Provost. Anyone want to give this a shot? You may have heard this one before, but I love it. Yeah, Marianne, go ahead.
Sure, I'll try it. Let's see. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The car demands some variety. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important.
Great. Isn't that a wonderful
What
paragraph?
a great paragraph.
I love that. So
Talk about like the form enacting meaning, you know, because the instructions and the description of what you're supposed to think about when you put together sentences is mimicked by the sentences that he uses.
Yeah. And I like that, because I feel like it's sort of, you know, we always have heard, well, vary the length of your sentences, but this sort of shows you in a really visceral way why, you know, why it's important to do that. So it's a good one. But I wanted to show you, you know, one that does something like this in, you know, an actual piece of literature. Would someone want to give this shot of this passage from Wallace Stegner's The Rocky Mountain West, which is an essay that he wrote in Marking the Sparrow's Fall? Anyone? Or I can do it if you want. No, go ahead, David. Go ahead.
By such a river, it is impossible to believe that one will ever be tired or old. Every sense applauds it. Taste it, feel its chill on the teeth. Its purity absolute. Watch its racing current, its steady renewal of force. It is transient and eternal. Listen again to its sounds. Get far enough away so that the noise of falling tons of water does not stun the ears, and hear how much is going on underneath. A whole symphony of smaller sounds, hiss and splash and gurgle, and small talk of side channels, the whisper of blown and scattered spray gathering itself and beginning to flow again, secret and irresistible among the wet rocks.
Thank you,
Wallace
David.
Mm.
So just, you know, it's just a question of listening. You hear how musical that passage is. You know, it's just it sings the meaning of itself for sure. It's a passage of about a river, right? And if it sounds like a river, it kind of flows like a river. There's a lot that's very river-like about that passage. But it's also just really musical, and part of it is the way that he varies. You know, he varies in the same way that we saw in that previous paragraph. Does that make sense? It's a beautiful passage, I think. So again, you know, when, especially in revision, it's just good to notice the length of your sentences. You know, I don't think this is necessarily something you need to pay attention early in the process, but, you know, there's definitely a point where I'll look at a draft and be like, wow, there's a lot of kind of medium length sentences here. You know, and I'll be really conscious about trying to vary it. And, you know, that's all, I think that's all that's required. Be aware of their length, mix them up. I think it's really one of the simple secrets to creating more readable prose. And it's actually a fairly easy thing to do. If you just go through your work at a certain time, say, I'm going to really look at my sentence length here and just try to vary it. It's actually a thing you can do in a relatively short period of time that can create a big jump in the readability and musicality of your prose. So I want to talk about a couple of quick case studies, because there are a couple of sentence writers that I think are really interesting from different perspectives. These are analyses that I did fairly long ago, but they seem to have held up over time. One of them is this idea of varying sentence lengths for emotional effects. And I wanted to use Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, because it is a book that is just, it's a crazy, violent, horrible book in many ways, but it's also like poetry. It's so beautiful. And it's also interesting because I think he has 2 new books coming out next month. I have heard through the grapevine, so that would be interesting. But I'm going to read you these 2 paragraphs, and I'm just calling them type 1 and type 2. And I want you to sort of listen to how they're different in terms of sentence length, first in terms of sentence length, and then in terms of emotional effect. Okay, so I'm going to read you type 1 sentence. The sun that rises is the color of steel. His mounted shadow falls for miles before him. He wears on his head a hat he's made from leaves, and they have dried and cracked in the sun, and he looks like a raggedy man wandered from some garden where he used to frighten birds. That's type 1. Type 2. A pair of horses drew the cart, and they went on up the road in a faint miasma of carbolic and passed from sight. He turned and watched them go. The naked feet of the dead jostled stiffly from side to side. Okay, so what do you notice about the way that the sentence length is varied in these 2 different types of passages?
Well, the first one has the longer sentence at the end, and the second one has the longer sentence at the beginning.
Exactly. It's very simple. And what would you say? I mean, could you make any sort of stab at what the emotional effect? Is there a difference in the emotional effect of those two different ways of arranging sentence length? Could be emotional effect or sort of imagistic effect. It may become more clear if we read a couple more. It's not, and it is something. Yeah, David.
Yeah, at first, I think the effect is more immediate in the first one, that you just all of a sudden feel it, the hot sun, and the way he's described it with the steel. I think the second one, it kind of draws you in, and you're kind of slower to react to it. And that's the way I get a sense of it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so basically, I mean, these patterns are kind of the inverse of one another, right? One of them starts out with short sentences and ends with a longer sentence. One of them starts out with a longer sentence and ends with shorter sentences. And in a sense, it could just be argued that McCarthy is just varying the length of his sentences to do what we've been talking about, to create more musicality, to avoid boring the reader with sentences of the same length. But I think the emotional effects are actually really there, and it is subtle. But remember what we said early on about saving the most important meaning for last. So if you think of a sentence as a unit of meaning, and the length of the sentence as sort of like let's just call it like, I don't know, a register of that meaning, putting at the longer sentence at the end of a passage draws more emphasis to that sentence, right? And it gives us a sense of mounting emotion. And then putting the longer sentence at the beginning causes us to focus more on the shorter sentences that come at the end, because we're sort of, we're kind of conditioned to focus to the most important meaning being saved for last. So again, this is highly subconscious and very subtle and more of an art than science. But I would call type 1 a boiling over paragraph, and type 2 a closing in paragraph. And so let me just read 2 more. Read the next 2 and see whether that makes sense. If you think of type 1 as boiling over and type 2 as closing in. So here's the type 1. Come days of begging, days of theft, days of riding where the road no soul save he. He's left behind the pinewood country, and the evening sun declines before him beyond an endless swale, and dark falls here like a thunderclap, and a cold wind sets the weeds to gnashing. The night sky lies so sprent with stars that there is scarcely a space of black at all, and they fall all night in bitter arcs, and it is so their numbers are no less. I mean, it's got 2 long sentences, but it is a sort of that sense of boiling over, right? Okay, so then here's the type 2 passage. The wheels shrank and the spokes reeled in their hubs and clattered like loom shafts, and at night they drive false spokes into the mortises and tie them down with strips of green hide, and they drive wedges between the iron of the tires and the sun-cracked felloes. They wobbled on, the trace of their untrue labors like sidewander tracks in the sand. The dullage pegs worked loose and dropped behind. Wheels began to break up. So what do you think?
I have to think about that. It does. I think I get what you're saying about the building up
Mm.
with the long sentence at the end,
Mm.
and the closing in with the long sentence at the beginning, so that it's sort of, yeah. And of course, what's happening in that paragraph, this last paragraph that you read, is that this cart is falling apart.
Yeah.
So you have the cart, and it's a very kind of bobbly, awkward motion.
Yeah.
The spokes reeled and clattered,
Yeah.
and then you have this very short sentence at the end: wheels began to break up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. So to me, that's the first sentence, the first type of paragraph, I should say, with its lengthening sentences creates an impression of sort of an initially suppressed feeling that's kind of boiling over in a cascade of images. And in McCarthy's case, these images are charged with foreboding and violence. It's the nature of the book. But there could be any other strong emotion too. And I think that this is something that can be very useful in your own writing. If you want to create a character that is suddenly overflowing with emotion, or that sort of the impression, maybe not a character, but just the impression of kind of emotion that is being suppressed. And then at a certain point, you can't suppress it anymore and it starts to boil over, then that kind of passage could reflect that, right? And then the second pattern, where you have these relatively long sentences that create a feeling of motion, right? I mean, as you were saying, Marianne, this motion is this sort of clattering motion of this cart driving along the landscape. And then the short sentences at the end kind of arrest that motion, and they give us a sense of closing in on a single significant image, isolating, and emphasizing that image. The wheels started to break up, and therefore giving it a greater impact, because you're saving it to the end. So you have the short sentences. This is what you end up focusing on in this sentence. Does that make sense? So it's interesting. I mean, this is not something that is definitive. And again, it is more art and science, but this is definitely something that you can use if you find key passages in your work where you can vary the length of sentences to create, and you want to create effect of either closing in on a single image or letting things boil over as the emotions sort of take over. Then you can play around. Sentence length can be one of the tools that you use to achieve that. So, okay. And then finally, I think we have just enough time to do this, and I wanted to go to a case study about Hemingway, because Hemingway was known as a very careful, if not even an obsessive reviser. Every word mattered. And, I think he wrote he wrote the ending of A Farewell to Arms something like 65 times. I don't know exactly what the number is, but, he wrote and rewrote things. He was very concerned with capturing the emotional and physical truth of what he was writing about. And I noticed when I was reading A Farewell to Arms that he uses A Farewell to Arms, to me, maybe his most poetic book, his most poetic novel, but he uses a lot of simple nouns. And contrary to the advice of many writers, you think about that, Flaubert's advice that, you should never repeat the same word on the same page or anywhere near it, or what you hear in a lot of critique groups or workshops, like you're repeating this word. So we're sort of trained not to repeat words, but, Hemingway repeated words a lot with what seemed like a real intentionality. So I wanted to kind of get to the bottom of what he was doing. And so I'm going to just read this paragraph and we'll talk about it. Okay. And try to notice, just close your eyes and notice which words, maybe don't even notice which words, just close your eyes and listen to it. Okay. Let the images play out in your mind. This is the opening of Farewell to Arms. The forest of oak trees on the mountain beyond the town was gone. The forest had been green in the summer when we had come into town, but now there were stumps and the broken trunks and the ground torn up. And one day at the end of the fall, when I was out where the oak forest had been, I saw a cloud coming over the mountain. It came very fast, and the sun went a dull yellow, and then everything was gray, and the sky was covered, and the cloud came on down the mountain, and suddenly we were in it, and it was snow. The snow slanted across the wind. The bare ground was covered. The stumps of the trees projected. There was snow on the guns, and there were paths in the snow going back to the latrines behind the trenches. Behind trenches. So this is not the opening, by the way, but that is a beautiful paragraph, right? So when you repeat nouns, when you repeat words, especially nouns, they resonate in a reader's mind. This is one of the reasons that we're warned against repetition, because if you repeat a word, the reader's going to notice it. It's going to float to the top of their mind. If it's unintentional, it tends to draw attention to words that you don't necessarily want the reader to be focusing on. But it's different when it's intentional. I think that this is what we see in this paragraph. So let's look at this a little more carefully. Which are the repeated nouns? Can you sort of come up with some examples of repeated nouns?
Snow.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one, especially toward the end, isn't it?
Forest, trees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Cloud.
Cloud.
Right. So if you were to read this quickly and then close your eyes, the chances are that the images that would stick with you would be of a forest, in this case, a devastated forest, of an overcast day, a cloudy day, and of the ground covered with snow. So the repeated nouns sort of ground the reader in a scene because they shift as they go, which is the really interesting thing. Like snow is repeated, but only toward the end, right? And so the choice, so first we experience the forest, then we experience the cloudiness, then we experience the snow. And this choice of repeated nouns creates a certain melancholy mood, right? This is the aftermath of the devastation of war. It's a cloudy day. You have the snow, the cold sensations of winter. And so this is a passage in which Hemingway is really painting in a way that's trying to make you feel certain emotions. And one of the primary ways he's doing that is by repeating nouns.
Mm-hmm.
Let me read you one more, and because I want to make sure that we have time, but do the same thing. Just let this flow over you and just try to remember what the images are that stick in your mind. The room was long with windows on the right-hand side and a door at the far end that went into the dressing room. The row of beds that mine was in faced the windows, and another row under the windows faced the walls. If you lay on your left side, you could see the dressing room door. There was another door at the far end that people sometimes came in by. If anyone were going to die, they put a screen around the bed so you could not see them die. But only the shoes and puttees of doctors and men nurses showed under the bottom of the screen, and sometimes at the end there would be whispering. Then the priest would come out from behind the screen, and afterward the men nurses would go back behind the screen to come out again, carrying the one who was dead with the blanket over him down the corridor between the beds, and someone folded the screen and took it away. What do you think? So you have room, row, door, windows, screen. Those are all repeated nouns, especially screen, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The shift from the repetition of room, row, windows, door to screen, 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 screen gives the reader the experience of turning inside the room and eventually settling on the screen. And why settle on the screen? Well, if you consider that the subject of the paragraph is death, which, as the narrative points out, occurs behind the screen. So it's a very clear impression, I think, that Hemingway was doing. And in terms of, does this make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think, for us, the takeaway is, if you can use repetition. If you're doing it intentionally, there's no reason not to. If you want certain impressions to linger, you can repeat, and especially I think repeating nouns can be effective if you want to do that. Whether Hemingway actually sat down with this in mind, I doubt that he sat down when he was first drafting this, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if he really actually thought about this when he was revising it to some degree.
Wow.
I really love how at the end someone folded the screen and took it away, so even the this sort of visual barrier that partly protects the other patients in the, who are wounded, I assume, in war. It protects them from seeing death that they all fear. In the end, there's no protection, and in fact, there's probably just an empty bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I noticed that with the word screen, it can be used as a verb as well. That screening whoever, whether it's the story that doesn't get written in the press or whatever. I know that, he was politically minded too, and that's what he was trying to establish. So it's just interesting. Really, it makes me appreciate Hemingway much more than I think I've told you before that I didn't, but the more that you present these examples makes me want to go back and read again.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to read, I mean, I don't know if Farewell to Arms is his best book, but to me, just on a sentence level, it's beautiful. The whole thing is very poetic. Okay, well, anyway, so I have a writing exercise. So I'm not going to give it to you now. You can do it when you're done if you want. But the idea to sort of get these things into your mind is to, from your own work or just making it up on the spot, write a type 1 and a type 2 paragraph and just look at what the emotional effects are when you're looking at something that you're writing yourself. I think you will see definite emotional effects. Will you be able to describe exactly what they are? Maybe not, but that's okay. I mean, I think it's just understanding that the way that you arrange sentence length can have these kinds of effects. And then the second part, or the other option, is to write or revise a paragraph from your own work using noun repetition to leave 3 or 4 impressions lingering in the eye, in the mind of the reader. So obviously we don't have time to do this now, but that's something, if you want to, you can work on later. So 2 final comments, and then I'll throw it open to questions as we wrap this up. One is, and this is sort of the elephant in the room, maybe, is that not every sentence has to be a work of art. I mean, some sentences are just there to do their job, right? In fact, most sentences just are there to get the job done. But the more that you can apply the techniques that we've been talking about for the last 3 lessons, I think, the more you sort of deliberately try to, especially late in revision, to use some of these effects, the more fluent you will be in their use, and the more it'll sort of come naturally to you as a sentence level writer. And then the second thing is that it would be easy to get caught up in the technical details of what we talked about. And, and if that's helpful for you to think of these things in terms of the vocabulary we've been using, like coordinate, cumulative, syntax, and stuff like that, fine. But I want to emphasize that so much of writing, as we all know, is intuitive, and it really is more of an art than a science. And so what I would encourage you to do is just to play around with your sentences, both when you first write them and then even more so in revision. It's always good to play, even with sentences that you may feel subconsciously are already set in stone, because playing with them gives you the opportunity to really crack them open. And to me, so much of the joy and fun of literature does take place at the sentence level. So my final takeaway is to have fun, experiment, play around with it. You never know what you'll discover, and there's nothing you can do wrong. You're not going to mess anything up. So just have fun and see where it takes you. So that's really all I have to say, but I would like to open it up. We have a few minutes if anyone has any questions or sort of anything that's sort of on your mind as we finish up. Yeah, Elisa.
Oh, first of all, thank you, because this was fascinating and wonderful and just very encouraging. And I'm noticing how the 2 Hemingway paragraphs are sticking in my mind still. There's a pervasive sense of sadness, and it's like, whoa. And it's encouraging that repeating nouns, it's kind of a relief. I don't have to just always search for new details, maybe. And just that repetition, the simplicity of that, I'm really noticing and aware of the effect that's creating.
That's cool. Thank you very much.
I love that, Lisa.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and this has been yet another eye opener or writing opener for us. It's been great to, there's a couple paragraphs here, or examples here that we've seen over the course of this class, the jazz piece in particular. And we can see with a different focus that, these sentences get even more rich as we go through this. So that's been wonderful that you pointed this out for us.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, go ahead, Marianne.
I agree, David. One of the things that just struck me was this sort of feeling of if you come back to using all of these tools, you come back in revision and crack things open. And, Lisa was saying, oh, this tool, the tool of repeated nouns feels really reassuring to me. The thought of cracking my paragraphs, my sentences open feels scary to me, which is fine. But it's like both things can happen with these tools.
It is scary. And it's part of it is, it's like, because you feel like you've written something good and you're like, God, I don't want to mess with it because I'm going to ruin it. Right. And also you see we're using word processors mostly. So you see your words in this beautiful font and it looks like they are set in stone. They've been passed down through the ages, even if it's just a first draft. And so it is scary to crack things open, but it can lead to good things. And I'm no expert. I'm only talking about my own experience, and all of the stuff for these classes was just me trying to figure it out. So I'm definitely not an expert in this stuff, but it has, I will tell you, it has definitely helped me, especially in the late. In fact, the project I'm working on now, I'm really looking forward to getting to the point where I feel I can do a sentence level draft, just go through and play with the sentences. Definitely not there yet. So
I've also appreciated this class a lot. I think the thing that's most interesting to me is I can't look at my sentences the same way anymore, because now I'm thinking of these things, and it's exciting because I have to. I'm coming in from a different viewpoint now, and I think it will only enhance my writing. So thank you for that.
Well, that's great to hear. And I can't think of a better way to end it. And thank you all for your participation. It's been really wonderful to have you here. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? So I've been in a writing group for a while, and I'm working with several writers who are really gifted, but they're still on their first or second draft. They spend so much time going back to the last chapter again and again to get their sentences right. And I keep saying to them, and certainly they're better schooled than I am, I keep saying, just write it, let that rosebush, grow wild. But they're not listening to me. I don't have the experience and command, but I'll say it again. But would you mind saying that whole phrase again about the rosebush again? I want to give a cap to that.
Yeah. So I think that this is my friend Edmund. God, why am I forgetting his name?
Poet. He's a poet.
Kunz, yeah. He said, I don't know. Anyway, he says you have to let the rose bush grow wild before you trim it back. And I think that is really is such great advice, because we got things back so early.
And I would say, and then see what flowers bloom or something along that.
Yeah,
exactly. End it with that.
That's great. Okay, well, good luck, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It was
you all.
great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.